The number almost nobody hits: 43% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency from savings, not the broader hypothetical, not eventually. They cannot cover $1,000 right now, today. If their car broke down tomorrow, the median emergency fund balance in 2026, according to a U.S. News survey published in January, is $5,000. That sounds reasonable until you realize it dropped by half from the previous year when the median was $10,000. The trend isn't getting better. And yet, every single personal finance YouTuber, every Reddit advice thread, every financial planning textbook keeps repeating the same standard advice: save 3 to 6 months of expenses. For a typical American household, that's somewhere between $15,000 and $40,000. Pause 1 second. Here's the problem with that advice. For 70% of viewers watching this, telling you to save $15,000 to $40,000 you currently have under $1,000 is like telling someone who can't run a mile that they should train for a marathon. The advice is technically correct. It's also practically useless. Welcome back to the Friday Dollar. Episode 4. Today we're going to do something almost no one else does on this topic. We're going to skip the marathon. We're going to build the first 1,000, then the next 4,000, then get to 10. By the time we hit 10,000, you'll know whether you actually need the marathon goal, and you'll have the system in place to keep going if so. Let's get into it. Why the 6-month rule is wrong for most people. Quick context. The 3 to 6 month emergency fund rule wasn't invented as a response to current economic conditions. It comes from a personal finance era, roughly the 1970s through the early 2000s, when 3 things were true that aren't true anymore. First, job changes were rare. The typical worker stayed in one job for 15, 20, even 30 years. When you lost your job, it was usually a big deal that happened maybe once or twice in your career. 6 months of expenses made sense as a buffer for an event that infrequent. Second, most people had defined benefit pensions. Their retirement was largely covered by their employer. The emergency fund didn't have to also be the disaster recovery fund. There was a separate safety net. Third, credit was not widely or instantly available as a backup. Without a credit card with a $5,000 or $10,000 limit, the only emergency response was cash. 6 months in cash made sense because there was nothing else. All 3 conditions have changed. Workers change jobs every 3 to 4 years on average. Defined by benefit pensions are nearly extinct in the private sector. And almost everyone has access to some form of credit, even if it's expensive. This doesn't mean emergency funds don't matter. It means the right size and the right approach are different from the 1970s rule. The behavioral finance research is clear. Small wins drive bigger savings outcomes than big distant goals. Vanguard found that simply having $2,000 in emergency savings was associated with a 21% increase in overall financial well-being scores. $2,000. Not 6 months of expenses. 2,000 on screen. Quote graphic of the Vanguard finding. That's the insight the standard advice misses. The biggest jump in financial security comes from getting from $0 to a few $1,000s, not from getting from a few thousand to 20,000. The first dollars are worth more than the last dollars. So that's where we focused. Tier 1, the first $1,000. Get this done in 8 weeks. Tier 1 is $1,000. The realistic timeline is 6 to 8 weeks for most people watching. Here's exactly what to do first. Calculate the gap. If you have less than $1,000 in any savings account right now, your gap is the difference between what you have and 1,000. If you have 800, your gap is 200. If you have 0, your gap is 1,000. Write the number down. Second, divide the gap by 8. That's your weekly target. If your gap is 1,000, you need to save $125 per week. If your gap is $500, $65 per week. Third, and this is where most savings advice fails, you need a specific source for that money, not vague cut spending. A specific identifiable source. 3 options that actually work. SEP on screen. Three options listed visually. Option A, sell unused items. Most households have several $1,000s of unused stuff sitting in closets, basements, garages, used clothes on Poshmark, old electronics on Swappa or Facebook Marketplace, books, kitchen gadgets, sports equipment. The first 1,000 often comes faster from selling than saving. B, find a 6 to 8 week extra income gig. DoorDash, Instacart, Uber. Tutoring or freelancing if you have skills, babysitting or pet sitting through care.com or Rover, just enough hours to hit your weekly target. 6 weeks of 8 hours per week at $20 an hour is $960. You're done. Knocked. C, auto transfer from existing income. Take your weekly target and set up an automatic transfer the day after payday from checking to a separate high-yield savings account. The key word is automatic. You're not deciding each week, you're deciding once. Most people use a combination. Sell some stuff, do a few weeks of side work, set up automatic transfers. By the end of week 8, you have $1,000 sitting in a separate account, earning 4% APY because you watched episode 2 of this channel. What changes after you hit Tier 1? 3 things, actually. First, you stop putting almost every minor unexpected expense on a credit card. Car repair, vet bill, broken appliance, cash now exists. Second, your stress level genuinely measurably decreases. That's the Vanguard finding from earlier, validated across multiple studies. Third, you've proven to yourself that this is possible. The momentum from Tier 1 is what carries you through Tier 2. Tier 2. The first $5,000, where real stability begins. Tier 2 is $5,000 total. You've got $1,000. You need $4,000 more. The realistic timeline is 6 to 9 months from where you finish Tier 1. The strategy here shifts from urgent gap closing to systematic accumulation. The pace slows down on purpose. Tier 1 was an 8-week sprint. Tier 2 is a marathon pace run. Specifically, you want to be moving roughly $400 to $500 per month into the emergency fund. That's about $125 per week. If your finances allow, more is better. If they don't, less is acceptable. Just stretch the timeline. Where does that money come from? At Tier 2, you stop relying on selling stuff and side gigs as the primary source. The model becomes percentage of income. Every paycheck before any other allocation except taxes and rent, a fixed amount goes to emergency savings. The specific number depends on your income. A reasonable rule, 10% of net income for emergency fund building until Tier 2 is hit. If you make $4,000 a month after taxes, that's $400 per month, $4,800 per year. You'll hit $5,000 in about 10 months. On-screen calculator visualization showing the math. What changes after you hit Tier 2? Now you can handle bigger emergencies. A car repair under $2,000, a medical bill of a few thousand, a short gap between jobs. You're not yet covered for a major job loss or a serious medical event, but the everyday financial fragility, the kind that puts most American families one bad month away from credit card debt, is largely solved. And here's the genuine psychological shift. At $5,000 in cash, most people stop thinking about money the same way. The stress of what if something breaks recedes. The mental energy that was being spent on financial anxiety becomes available for other things: career planning, relationships, sleep. That's the real return on Tier 2. Not the interest, the freed up brain capacity. Tier 3, the first $10,000, the confidence threshold. Tier 3 is $10,000. You're going from $5,000 to $10,000. Realistic timeline, another 12 to 18 months from where you finish Tier 2. At this stage, the strategy actually doesn't change much. Same automatic transfers, same percentage of income discipline, same separate high-yield account. The system you built to get to 5,000 is the system that takes you to 10,000. You just keep doing it. What changes is your decision space. At $10,000 in liquid emergency savings, most American households have crossed a meaningful psychological threshold. You can survive a major car emergency. You can absorb a medical bill of significant size. You can take a few months between jobs without immediate desperation. For most income levels, $10,000 is roughly equivalent to 2 to 3 months of essential expenses, which means you're at the lower end of the traditional 3 to 6 month range that the personal finance establishment talks about. Here's where the honest counter-argument matters. $10,000 is enough for most people. It's not enough for everyone. If you have a high income, high savings rate, and very stable employment, say you're a tenured doctor or a professor or government employee, $10,000 is genuinely too small. You should aim higher. If you have variable income, freelancers, contractors, commission-based work, $10,000 is genuinely too small. Aim for closer to $15,000 or $20,000 because your income gaps will be longer. If you're a single parent, primary breadwinner with dependents, or have significant medical expenses, $10,000 is genuinely too small. You'll need to keep going. But for the median American household, dual income or stable single income, no major medical issues, employed in a relatively stable field, $10,000 is a real threshold. It's where the marginal benefit of additional emergency savings starts to decrease relative to other financial goals like retirement contributions, debt payoff, or investment. Hit $10,000. Then evaluate. If your specific situation calls for more, keep going. If not, redirect the savings rate toward your next financial priority. Where to actually keep it? Quick note before the close. Where to keep this money matters. Emergency funds belong in a high-yield savings account at an FDIC-insured bank. We covered the specifics in Episode 2. As of April 2026, you can earn somewhere between 3.1 and 4.0% APY at major online banks like Marcus, Ally, Capital One, Synchrony, and SoFi on a $5,000 emergency fund. That's about $180 per year of interest. On $10,000, it's about $360 per year. Free money for keeping your safety net somewhere sensible instead of in a Chase savings account paying 0.4%. What this money is not for: investing in stocks, parking in bonds, buying crypto, or putting in CDs that lock it up. The defining feature of an emergency fund is liquidity. The whole point is that you can access it tomorrow if you need to. Investments don't qualify. Even low-risk investments don't qualify. A 30% stock market crash typically happens during a recession, which is exactly when you'd need the money. Don't be clever with it. Cash, high-yield savings, done. Open a separate account for it specifically. Don't mix the emergency fund with your regular savings. Naming the account something like emergency only or do not touch creates psychological friction against tapping it for non-emergencies. Friction is a feature here. Next Friday, that's the real path. 0 to 1,000 in 8 weeks, 1,000 to 5,000 in another 6 to 9 months, 5 to 10,000 in another 12 to 18 months. Total realistic timeline from 0 to 10,000, roughly 2 years. If that sounds slow, compare it to where you are now. The median American emergency fund just dropped to $5,000. The median Empower respondent reports $500 in emergency savings. Hitting 10,000 puts you in the top quartile of American financial preparedness. In 2 years, tell me in the comments which tier you're starting from. Tier 0, under 1,000. Tier 1, between 1 and 5. Tier 2, 5 to 10. Tier 3, already over 10. No shame regardless of where you are. This is exactly the kind of question Friday Dollar exists to help with. I read every reply for the first 48 hours after a video goes up next Friday. The 2026 tax changes nobody is talking about that could quietly cost you thousands. We'll walk through what's new, who's affected, and what to do before the next tax deadline. I'm the Friday Dollar, your Friday afternoon money advisor. Hit subscribe. See you next week.